David Simmons.
Well, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The key issue for me in this debate this evening is not so much with the raising of the funds. There are no perfect solutions, but with the spending of them. I'm more than happy to look my constituents in the eye and say that I voted to raise taxes if I can demonstrate that we have something to show for it. And those of us with a local government background will know that the social care sector has been crying out for a sustainable financial settlement for at least 2 decades. The fair access criteria, which were implemented by a Labour government in 2003, precipitated a financial crisis in a sector which was already under pressure by removing local authority discretion about services and failing to provide the funding for the new model. And existing charging policies and council tax precepts have proved unable to bridge that gap. As a chairman of a social services committee in those days, I looked my residents in the eye whilst imposing Labour's charging policy for social care upon them. So I welcome the government's courage in bringing forward a proposal tonight which looks both realistic and workable.
Will he give way on that point?
I'll be pleased to give way to one.
I'm interested, from his local government background, whether he thinks that this policy will fit within a wider local government finance reform agenda.
The honourable member for Milton Keynes is absolutely correct to highlight that wider reform agenda. I know we are anticipating more detailed proposals from government in due course. But it's clear, and he will know this from his local government experience, that if we are serious in this House about fixing social care, much of which is not about the elderly, but working with adults and children with disabilities, we must learn the lessons from the sector of several decades of change. And firstly, Madam Deputy Speaker, we must reflect on the lessons of the Better Care Fund, which taught us that councils have been the efficient delivery partner. And even when the sole focus has been to relieve pressure on the NHS, councils have been much more efficient on the whole in using those funds. So we must avoid, as many members have said, that convenient political mistake of allowing it all to disappear into an NHS black hole with nothing to show for it. But having learnt the lessons of the Better Care Fund, we have to ensure that those additional national insurance costs don't consume the extra funding. And I know I've heard ministers' assurances about this, but the care sector has heard many times of new funding which has been cancelled out by deductions from other budgets. So we need absolute clarity that this will find its way to the front line. The second issue which I'd like to highlight, Madam Deputy Speaker, is the point that this affects not just the elderly. Around 2/3 of social care costs are for working age adults and children. And in many of those cases, the NHS is barely involved. But the costs can be eye-wateringly high. So we need to make sure that as we direct those funds, as the member for Milton Keynes highlighted, that they are getting to where they are required. The third lesson, and this has been mentioned by a couple of members, is how the market responds. We have a thriving market for social care in this country, including charities, including the private sector and local authorities. And we know many of those organisations will see the £86,000 as a very tempting target. The sooner you spend your £86,000, the sooner the state steps in. So we need to ensure that we've learnt the lessons of what's happened with the involvement of some businesses, particularly in the children's social care sector, and make sure that this is not seen as simply an opportunity to rip off the taxpayer. So finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, may I urge ministers to review the operation of the fair access criteria and the rules that underpin them. The rule of provide for one and provide for all, that was clarified by a subsequent judicial review of the London Borough of Harrow, forced the retrenchment of local authorities in adult social care towards only serving the most critical needs of people in our constituencies. And many of those... I'll be pleased to give way to
the Honourable Gentleman. I'm very grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for giving way, and he's giving an excellent speech. I think one of the things that he's touched on, perhaps not expanded on, is the efficiencies that local government has found. And are there any particular lessons that he thinks are relevant to the NHS as we move forward?
For time, this is not fair on the ministers who are winding up. David Simmons.
Madam Deputy Speaker, so concluding rapidly, it is a very important point that is made. what we need to recognise, many constituents are surprised to discover that as a matter of law, very strict eligibility criteria restrict what they can access. So we need to ensure, as we reform the sector, that we free up local authorities to use these resources to meet those demographic challenges.
Shadow